The rusted winch groaned in protest, each rotation a drawn-out sigh against the relentless shush of the Gulf. Cody braced against the gunwale of the Surtha Z-Dog, felt the strain in his shoulders, mirroring the gritty ache in his soul. Salt spray stung his lips, tasting of regret and brine. The fishing boat, the fitting Miss Lucille, lay broken on the sandy bottom 30 feet below, a skeletal reminder of someone else's misfortune. He'd been wrestling with her for 3 hours, trying to free the tangled mess of nets and crab traps that clung to her hull. He adjusted his dive mask, the neoprene cool against his skin, and checked the air gauge, 2,000 psi enough for another descent. But not much to spare. The current was picking up, a subtle tug that hinted at the storm brewing offshore. He hated salvage jobs like this. Small time, hard work for a meager return. But after the licensing board fiasco, after losing everything, he didn't have the luxury of being choosy. He signaled to Marco, his wiry, taciturn deckhand, who killed the engine. The sudden silence was a reprieve, broken only by the cry of gulls circling overhead and the rhythmic slap of the hull against the gentle swell. "You sure about this, Cody?" Marco's voice, rough as barnacles, cut through the quiet. "This ain't no pleasure cruise. That weather turnin'. Real ugly," Cody dinned. Meet his gaze, he was used to Marco's skepticism, the quiet disapproval that had followed him since he de-hired the man 6 months ago. "She is not going anywhere, Marco, and the owner wants her off the bottom, pays well enough." It wasn't about the money, not entirely. It was about proving he could still do this, that he hadn't lost his touch, hadn't become a liability, that the demons hadn't won. He double-checked his gear. The familiar ritual, a small comfort. The weight belt, the buoyancy compensator, the dive knife strapped to his calf. Each piece a testament to his preparedness, a shield against the unforgiving ocean. Submerging was always a transition, a surrender. The sun's glare fractured and faded, replaced by the dim, emerald light filtering through the water. The Miss Lucille materialized from the gloom, a ghostly wreck swathed in seaweed. He navigated through the skeletal remains of the wheelhouse, the corroded metal cold and slick beneath his gloved hands. It was then, as he worked to free a snarled net, that it came back to him. Not in a rush of images, but a slow, suffocating ache. The turquoise waters of the Bahamas. The feeling of Lena's hand in his. The carefree laughter that now echoed only in the hollow chambers of his memory. They'd been exploring a coral reef, a secluded spot. She'd discovered on a charter dive. He'd been distracted adjusting his camera when he turned to find her. Gone. The current had been deceptively strong that day. He'd searched for hours, his lungs burning, his hope dwindling with each passing minute. They found her body 3 days later, tangled in the wreckage of an old freighter. A simple equipment malfunction. The investigation concluded. A faulty regulator. But he knew better. He felt it. A cold premonition, a sense of dread that had settled over him just moments before he lost sight of her. He pushed the memory down, a familiar, exhausting effort. Grief was a current too, and if he let it take hold, it would drag him under. He worked with a mechanical precision, cutting away the debris, his mind a blank slate. He had a job to do. He had to focus. Back on the seedy dog. The sky had begun to bruise, the calm sea hinting at the fury to come. Marco was monitoring the weather radio, his brow furrowed with concern. "Hurricane Isidore, intensified to a Category 2, he announced, his voice clipped. "Track shifted slightly west, but we still in the cone. They recalling for sustained winds of 105 miles per hour. Cody felt a knot tighten in his stomach. A Category 2 was serious but manageable. A 3 or 4, that was a different story. He needed to finish the salvage and get back to shore. He was about to order another dive when his phone buzzed in the waterproof pouch strapped to his wrist. He surfaced, pulling the phone free. It was an unknown number, Cody Rourke. A voice rasped on the other end, distorted and low, as if muffled by distance. Speaking. "Heard you are the best damn salvage operator in these parts. Heard you don't scare easy. Who is this?" Cody demanded, his hand tightening around the phone. The voice ignored his question. "There is a wreck. A big one. 100 miles south, just outside the shipping lanes, laying in about 200 feet. Old cargo ship went down in the 50s. Legend has it, she was carrying something special. Cody's pulse quickened. 200 feet was deep, pushing the limits of his equipment. And a wreck from the 50s, that could be a treasure trove. He forced himself to remain cautious. How did you find out about it? Let's just say I have reliable sources. Nobody knows it is there, not yet. The hurricane-esque gonna stir things up, make it visible. The line crackled with static. Cody tasted adrenaline, a dangerous mix of excitement and apprehension. What is the catch? The catch is simple. I want you to be the first one to reach it. Be the first to document it. Be the first to claim it. Claim it? A very generous share, 50%. The salvage rights are complicated. Let's just say ownership. Murky. But I can make it worth your while. A life-changing amount. Cody considered the offer. 50% of a historically significant shipwreck. It was a gamble, a huge one. He knew he couldn't trust this anonymous caller. But the thought of the reward of finally escaping the shadow of his past was intoxicating. And if I pass, he asked, his voice carefully neutral. The voice on the other end went cold. Some things are better left lost, Mr. Rourke. Some secrets are best kept buried. The line went dead. Cody stared at the phone, his knuckles white. The storm was gaining momentum, the wind whistling through the rigging of the Sea Dog. He needed to decide, and he needed to decide fast. Marco, he said, his voice tight, prep the boat. We rechanging plans. He knew he should head for port, batten down the hatches, ride out the storm. But the lure of the wreck, the promise of untold riches, was too strong to resist. He needed a drink. The salty crab was dimly lit, smelling of stale beer and desperation. The place hadn't changed much in the 20 years he'd been coming here. Same chipped formica tables, same sticky floor, same cast of weathered faces nursing their sorrows. He found a stool at the bar, signaling old man Hemlock, the owner, for a whiskey. Rough weather common, Cody. Hemlock grunted, sliding a glass across the counter. You should have stayed home. Got things to do, Cody replied, taking a long swallow. The whiskey burned down his throat, a temporary anesthetic for his troubled thoughts. He scanned the room, his gaze stopping on Ray Tillman, who was holding court at a nearby table surrounded by a gaggle of admiring tourists. Ray was everything Cody wasn't: successful, polished, and utterly without a conscience. Ray owned 3 charter boats and a waterfront resort. He'd made a fortune exploiting the tourists' desire for a carefree Gulf experience. He also held a grudge against Cody, a simmering resentment that had begun years ago when Cody had outbid him on a lucrative salvage contract. Their eyes met, and Ray offered a slow, deliberate smirk. Well, Ray drawled, his voice carrying across the room. If it isn't Cody Rourke, the disgraced diver. Cody ignored him, focusing on his drink. But Ray wasn't finished. Heard you are back to picking at the bones of sunken fishing boats, Ray continued, his voice dripping with condescension. Not exactly living the high life, are you? Cody clenched his fists, fighting the urge to respond. He'd learned long ago that engaging with Ray was a pointless exercise. Still chasing ghosts, Cody, Ray pressed, his eyes glinting with malice. Perhaps you should stick to searching for lost wives. Seems that is where your talents lie. The blood drained from Cody's face. He hadn't anticipated that. Ray knew exactly where to hit him. A murmur rippled through the bar. Before Cody could react, he felt a hand on his shoulder. Marco, let's go. Cody, Marco said, his voice low and urgent now. Cody allowed himself to be steered towards the door, ignoring Ray's triumphant laughter that followed them into the swirling wind. Outside, the first fat drops of rain began to fall, splattering against the pavement. The hurricane was coming, and with it, something else. A darkness, a sense of foreboding that settled over Cody like a shroud. As they climbed into the city Sea Dog, his phone buzzed again. Another anonymous number. He hesitated before answering. Just a reminder, Mr. Rourke, the distorted voice rasped. The clock is ticking. The storm is your opportunity. But remember, Some things are better left lost. The sea dog bucked and rolled, a small cork tossed on a rapidly rising swell. Rain lashed against the windshield, reducing visibility to near zero. Cody gripped the helm knuckles white, fighting to maintain a heading into the churning gray expanse. The coordinates the anonymous caller had provided led him to a desolate patch of the Gulf, 100 miles south of the Louisiana coast. Even in calmer seas, it would have been a challenging dive. Now, with Hurricane Isidore bearing down, it felt like a suicide mission. "Cody!" Marco shouted over the roar of the wind. He was strapped into a heavy weather jacket, looking like a seasoned mariner bracing for the worst. "This ain't smart, not even a little bit." "We here," Cody replied, his voice grim. "Might as well see what we came for." He spent the last 4 hours running diagnostics on the Sea Dog SOTI sonar equipment, cross-referencing the coordinates with nautical charts. The reading was definitive. A large metallic mass rested on the seabed, roughly 200 feet below. He killed the engine, and the Sea Dog drifted with the currents. The waves slammed against the hull, sending tremors through the boat. Cody activated the underwater drone, a remotely operated vehicle equipped with a camera and sonar. He lowered it slowly into the turbulent water. Watching the feed on the monitor in the cabin, the image was grainy and distorted at first, a swirling vortex of silt and debris. Then, gradually, a shape began to emerge from the gloom. The skeletal remains of a ship encrusted with barnacles and coral. A freighter, judging by its size and configuration. A relic of a bygone-era bingo, Cody muttered, a surge of adrenaline coursing through him. The drone's sonar confirmed what he suspected. The wreck was remarkably intact. Considering its age and the unforgiving environment, a large portion of the hull was still intact and the superstructure, despite being heavily corroded, was relatively well preserved. "Looks like she settled relatively gently," Marco observed, peering at the monitor. "Not much structural damage, but she is buried, Cody, silted and real bad." "That is good," Cody said, surprising even himself. A silted wreck meant the contents were protected, preserved from scavengers and the ravages of time. It also meant a more challenging dive. He began to prepare his equipment, meticulously checking his tanks, regulators, and underwater lights. He was diving alone. Marco, despite his concerns, was a professional and would remain on the surface to monitor his progress and provide support. Descending into the murky depths was like entering another world. Visibility was limited to maybe 10 feet, a claustrophobic abyss of swirling sediment and ghostly shadows. He activated his high-intensity dive light, cutting a narrow beam through the gloom. The freighter loomed before him, a massive, decaying hulk. Schools of fish darted amongst the wreckage, their scales flashing in the beam of his light. He swam along the exterior of the hull, following the contours of the ship until he located the bridge, or what was left of it. The captain's quarters were surprisingly intact. Though the furnishings had long since disintegrated, he swam through a collapsed doorway, his light revealing a scene frozen in time. A rusted desk, a broken chair, a scattering of personal effects, and in the corner, wedged between a crumbling bulkhead and the ship's frame, a safe. It was an old-fashioned safe made of thick steel with a complex locking mechanism. It was bolted, or rather, welded into the floor and wall. Someone hadn't wanted this safe to go anywhere. Cody circled the safe, examining it carefully. It was massive, easily 6 feet tall and 4 feet wide. It would require specialized tools to crack, tools he didn't have on the Sea Dog. But the sheer size and weight of it suggested that whatever was inside was valuable. Very valuable. He tried the handle, but it wouldn't budge. No surprise there. He inspected the locking mechanism, searching for any signs of tampering or damage. The welding was crude but effective, reinforcing the impression that whoever had secured the safe wanted to ensure its contents remained undisturbed, no matter the cost. He surfaced, his lungs aching, his mind racing. "I found it," he told Marco, hauling himself onto the deck, a big safe, welded into the captain's quarters. "It is ancient." Marco raised an eyebrow. "A safe, huh? What do you think's inside?" "That is what I need to find out," Cody said. "But I am going to need some tools, a cutting torch, a drill, A lock, picking kit, the works. We in the middle of a hurricane, Cody, Marco reminded him. Getting back to port and gathering those supplies is going to take time. The storm is closing in. Cody glanced at the darkening sky, the waves growing taller and more erratic. He knew Marco was right, but he couldn't walk away now, not when he was so close. One more dive, he said, his voice determined, just to get a better look. See if I can find anything that might give us a clue about what is inside. He descended again, the water even more turbulent than before. The visibility had deteriorated to near zero. He swam back to the captain's quarters, cautiously navigating through the debris. Filled corridors. As he examined the safe, he noticed something he missed during his initial inspection. A small, rectangular space beneath the locking mechanism. He reached in. His fingers brushing against something paper. He pulled it out and switched on his dive light. It was a photograph, faded and water-damaged, but still discernible. A black and white image of a woman. A young woman laughing, her hair blowing in the wind. She was standing on a beach, her arm linked with a man. Cody stared at the photograph, his heart pounding in his chest. It couldn't be. But it was the woman in the photograph bore a striking, unsettling resemblance to Lena. The same almond-shaped eyes, the same delicate features, the same radiant smile. It was like looking at a ghost. He lingered for another few minutes, overwhelmed by a wave of grief and confusion. Who was this woman, and what was her connection to the shipwreck? Suddenly, he felt a violent surge in the current throwing him against the ship. Hull debris swirled around him, obscuring his vision. The water was colder now, and the pressure was increasing. He checked his air gauge. He was running low. He knew he had to get out now. He began his ascent, fighting against the current, struggling to maintain his bearings. Visibility was zero. He disoriented and struggling. He realized he lost track of his direction. He broke the surface, coughing and gasping for air. The CDC dog was nowhere to be seen. He scanned the churning water, his heart sinking. "Marco, Marco," he shouted, his voice lost in the roar of the wind and waves. He was alone. The storm surge had lifted the sea dog higher further out to sea. He caught a glimpse of her, a dark silhouette bobbing on the monstrous waves, then lost sight of her again. He started swimming towards where he thought she'd been, but the current was relentless, pulling him further and further away from the boat. A rogue wave crashed over him, knocking him underwater. He fought to regain his composure, but the pressure was overwhelming. He was running out of air, losing his strength. Just as he was beginning to lose consciousness, he saw it. A flicker of light. Marco, piloting a small inflatable raft, was searching for him. He mustered the last of his energy and waved his arms frantically. Marco spotted him and steered the raft towards his position. Cody was hauled aboard, shivering and exhausted. "You are lucky I saw you," Marco said, his voice filled with relief. "That was close. Too close." "The boat," Cody stammered, his voice weak. "She is okay," Marco said. "I managed to get her anchored, but we need to get out of here, now, before the worst of the storm hits." Back on the storm hits back on the Conseil dog, soaked to the bone and shivering with cold. Cody sat staring at the photograph. The woman's face seemed to mock him, a painful reminder of his loss. He turned the picture over. Scrawled on the back, in faded ink, was a single word, "Fami," and beneath it, a date, 1952. He carefully tucked the photograph under the safe's locking mechanism, a haunting discovery in the depths of a forgotten wreck. The hurricane howled, rattling the Timdy sissy dog like a toy. The ocean raged, and Cody Rourke knew, with a chilling certainty, that he had stumbled upon something far more dangerous than a sunken treasure. The rain had eased to a drizzle, but the Gulf remained a bruised and restless beast. The 30 dog was safely moored in a protected cove, riding out the remnants of Hurricane Isidore. Cody, fueled by lukewarm coffee and a gnawing unease, was hunched over a laptop in the cramped cabin, the glow of the screen illuminating his tired face. He spent the last 12 hours poring over maritime records, searching for any information about the freighter he discovered. The ship's name was the Finny Morviken, a Norwegian cargo vessel that had vanished without a trace in 1952. According to the manifest, she was carrying a shipment of textiles and canned goods. But the manifest felt incomplete, too clean. He dug deeper, scouring historical archives and obscure shipping databases. Whispers started to emerge, rumors of a valuable, untraceable cargo, jewels, perhaps, or cash. Lots of cash. The Fimorviken had disappeared during a fierce storm, almost identical to Isidore. A storm that had crippled shipping lanes and caused widespread devastation along the Gulf Coast. The official investigation had concluded that the ship had succumbed to the elements, lost with all hands. But Cody sensed a cover-up, a deliberate attempt to bury the truth. He needed a local perspective. Someone who knew the history of the area, the folklore, and the hidden stories. He found his answer in Old Man Tiber, a wizened historian who ran a dusty antique shop in the sleepy town of Port Azure. Tiber was a walking encyclopedia of local lore, a repository of forgotten tales and whispered secrets. The Fimorviken to Tiber said, stroking his long white beard, "Now there is a name I haven't heard in a long time. They said she went down with a fortune, a bootlegger, says fortune, to be precise. A bootlegger." Cody asked, leaning forward. Vinny, the Vain Moridi, a notorious character during Prohibition, ran a lucrative running operation out of New Orleans. They say he was smart, ruthless, and rich, very rich. Tiber paused, his eyes twinkling with amusement. Legend has it, the Vain was skimming profits from his operation, hiding the excess cash on the Morviken, a floating bank, if you will. When Prohibition ended, he was supposed to transfer the money to offshore accounts. But the storm hit, and the Morviken vanished. Along with the Vain's fortune, and the Vain, Cody asked. He survived the storm, Tiber said with a shrug. Lived to a ripe old age, but he never recovered his money. They say it haunted him for the rest of his days. Was there ever any investigation? Oh, plenty. The FBI, the Coast Guard, even private detectives. But the Morviken remained lost, a watery grave for a bootlegger's dream. Cody thanked Tiber and headed back to the sinister dog, his mind buzzing with possibilities. The safe. The photograph of the woman who looked like Lena. The bootlegger's fortune, it was all connected somehow. A decades-old mystery resurfacing with the force of a hurricane. He was meticulously checking his diving gear when he saw it. Ray Tillman. Sleek. White charter boat. Findy, the Wanderer, circling slowly offshore. It was too far away to make out details, but Cody recognized the distinctive silhouette. "What is he up to?" Marco muttered, noticing Tillman's boat as well. "I don't know," Cody said, his grip tightening on a wrench, "but I don't like it." Later that afternoon, Tillman materialized at the dock, swaggering towards the sinister dog with a forced smile. He was dressed in expensive fishing gear, looking every inch the successful charter operator. "Cody," he greeted, his voice oozing with false camaraderie. "Heard you had some luck out there. Found something interesting, I presume." "Just a wreck," Cody replied, keeping his tone neutral. "A wreck with a safe, I hear," Tillman said, his eyes gleaming with avarice. "A very old safe. Could be worth something." "That is my business," Cody said, his voice hardening. "Look, Cody," Tillman said, lowering his voice. "I am a reasonable man. I am willing to offer my assistance. I have the equipment, the manpower. We could salvage that wreck properly, split the profits, a win-win situation." Cody knew what Tillman was doing. He wasn't offering assistance. He was trying to muscle in on the operation, to hijack his discovery. "I am doing fine on my own," Cody said, his voice cold. Tillman's smile vanished. "Don't be foolish, Cody. You are out of your league. This is a big salvage, requires experience, resources." "I have everything I need," Cody said, turning his back on Tillman. "You'll regret this," Tillman warned, his voice laced with menace. "You'll regret turning down my offer." He spun on his heel and strode back towards Fiddy the Wanderer, leaving Cody seething with anger. As Cody prepared for a second dive to retrieve the necessary tools to open the safe, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He checked his sonar, but it showed nothing. He scanned the horizon, but Civi the Wanderer was nowhere to be seen. He descended once more, reaching the Civi Morviken with practiced ease. The visibility was still poor, but the currents had subsided. He began to work, carefully attaching a cutting torch to the safe steel door. As he worked, he noticed a flash of movement in his peripheral vision, a shadow slipping through the murky water. He turned, his heart pounding. The Wanderer, not the boat itself, but a smaller inflatable piloted by one of Tillman's deckhands. The man was clearly observing him, documenting his progress. Cody felt a surge of fury. Tillman was spying on him, trying to steal his discovery. He considered confronting the man, but decided against it. He needed evidence. He needed proof of Tillman's interference. He finished cutting the lock, creating a small opening in the safe door. He shone his light inside. The safe was filled with boxes, bundles of waterproofed papers, and something metallic glinting in the darkness. He needed to get the contents back to the sooty sea dog, examine them properly. He began to carefully extract the boxes, securing them in a salvage bag back on board. With the salvage contents spread across the cabin table, Cody began to sort through the papers. They were mostly financial records, ledgers detailing transactions and expenses. They were written in a code, a complex system of numbers and symbols. He would need an expert to decipher them, but it was the newspaper clippings that caught his attention. Yellowed articles from the 1950s, detailing the investigation into the Sooty Morvacan's sooty parents, and amongst them, one clipping in particular, a small article tucked away on an inside page. The headline read, "Local socialite found dead sooty, possible link to Moretti syndicate." The article detailed the murder of a woman named Isabel Moreau. She had been found floating in the Mississippi River, the victim of what was initially ruled a drowning. But investigators suspected foul play, a possible connection to Vinny, the Vane Moretti, and his illicit operations. Cody stared at the photograph accompanying the article. A clear, black and white image of a beautiful woman with almond-shaped eyes and a radiant smile. A woman who looked exactly like the woman in the faded photograph he found hidden beneath the safe's locking mechanism. And the chilling realization washed over him. Isabel Moreau was his wife's mother. The air hung thick and heavy, saturated with the smell of brine and impending fury. The hurricane, now designated Category 3, was bearing down on the Louisiana coast, the weather reports painting a grim picture of catastrophic flooding and sustained winds. Despite the mandatory evacuation orders issued for the Outer Banks, Cody was steadfast. He wouldn't leave until he'd cracked that safe. Not after everything. He'd spent the last few hours in Port Azure, procuring a hydraulic spreader and a heavy-duty lock, picking kit from a surly salvage supply store owner who'd clearly seen it all. The tools were expensive, draining the last of his meager reserves, but they were necessary. He returned to the Sirisi Doga, a knot of dread tightening in his stomach with each passing nautical mile. The sea was a churning maelstrom, the waves towering like dark mountains. Marco was battling to keep the boat anchored, his face etched with worry. "You're crazy, Cody," he shouted over the wind. "This ain't worth it. We need to get out of here." Cody replied, pulling on his dive suit. Just one more dive. He descended, the water colder and more turbulent than before. Visibility was down to mere feet. As he swam towards the Finamorvicani, he noticed something wrong. A length of cable connected to his air supply had been deliberately kinked, restricting the airflow. Someone known had been here. Someone had tried to sabotage him. A cold fury washed over him. It had to be Tillman. He hadn't imagined the man's hostility. This was beyond a simple power play. This was dangerous. He quickly corrected the kink. His breath coming in ragged gasps, he reached the safe, his heart pounding, and began to set up the hydraulic spreader. The tool groaned and strained as he applied pressure to the safe door, the metal protesting with a screeching whine. Suddenly, the surface erupted in chaos. He saw Marco wrestling with a figure, a blur of flailing limbs and shouted curses. He recognized the build, the aggressive stance anyway Tillman. Cody abandoned the safe and shot towards the surface, breaking through the waves just as Tillman landed a punch to Marco's jaw. Marco stumbled back, clutching his face, blood welling between his fingers. "Stay out of this, Rourke," Tillman roared, turning towards Cody. "This doesn't concern you. It concerns me when you start attacking my crew," Cody said, his voice dangerously low. Tillman smirked, cracking his knuckles. You always were a bleeding heart, Cody, always trying to play the hero. But out here, it is a dog-eat-dog world. He lunged at Cody, swinging a wild right hook. Cody ducked, sidestepping the blow, and retaliated with a swift jab to Tillman's gut. Tillman stumbled backward, winded, but quickly recovered, his eyes blazing with rage. The fight was brutal and clumsy, a desperate struggle on the pitching deck of the feisty dog. They grappled and wrestled, each man landing glancing blows. The storm intensified, the waves crashing over the deck, soaking them to the bone. Tillman was bigger, stronger, but Cody fought with a desperate ferocity, fueled by adrenaline and righteous anger. He managed to maneuver Tillman towards the railing, and with a well-placed shove sent him sprawling over the side. Marco, groaning and holding his jaw, secured a life ring and tossed it towards Tillman, who was sputtering and flailing in the churning water. Get him out of there, Cody ordered, his breath coming in ragged gasps. But don't get too close. Marco, despite his injuries, managed to haul Tillman back onto the boat, securing him with rope. You're insane, Cody, Marco said, his voice trembling with anger and fear. We need to go. Now, Cody didn't argue. He knew Marco was right. He'd pushed his luck too far. But he wasn't leaving without the contents of that safe. He descended once more, ignoring the protests of the wind and the waves. He reattached the hydraulic spreader and resumed his work. The door groaned and buckled, metal screaming against metal. Finally, with a deafening crack, the lock gave way. The safe door swung open, revealing its hidden treasures, bundles of waterproofed cash, stacks of ledgers, and a small, ornate box made of polished wood, working quickly. He transferred the contents into a reinforced salvage bag, securing it tightly to his buoyancy compensator. The cash felt cold and heavy against his chest. He knew instinctively that this was the fortune Vinny, the vein Moretti had tried to hide. He began to inspect the box. It was locked, but the mechanism was simple. He used his lock-picking tools to carefully manipulate the tumblers, and with a soft click, the box sprang open. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, lay a single object, a silver locket engraved with a delicate floral pattern. He opened the locket, and his breath caught in his throat. Inside was a miniature portrait, a young woman with almond-shaped eyes and a radiant smile. It wasn't Isabel Moreau, it was a younger version of her, and next to her image, a faded inscription, "Faded, my dearest Lena." He felt a jolt of icy dread. Lena. His Lena. What was his wife's mother doing involved with a notorious bootlegger? Suddenly, a dark shape materialized from the gloom. A figure in a dive suit moving with a predatory grace. The figure swam directly towards him, reaching for the salvage bag. Cody instinctively grabbed for his dive knife, his heart pounding in his chest. This wasn't about money anymore. This was about something far more sinister. This was about a buried past, a dangerous secret, and someone who was willing to kill to keep it hidden. The figure lunged, its hand grasping for the salvage bag. A desperate grab in the swirling darkness. The struggle had begun. The water turned instantly into a churning, claustrophobic battleground. The assailant, a shadowy figure in a black dive suit, slammed into Cody, knocking the wind from his lungs. A desperate, silent struggle erupted amidst the decaying metal of the Contre Morvican. They grappled and twisted, locked in a deadly embrace, the limited visibility amplifying the panic. Cody, hampered by the salvage bag and the constricting wreckage, fought with a savage determination. He lashed out with his dive knife, narrowly missing his attacker's face. His assailant was stronger, more experienced. Every maneuver was precise, calculated. He managed to wrench the knife from Cody's grip, sending it spiraling into the gloom. Then, a glint of recognition, a familiar scar above the left eye. Cody's blood ran cold. "Bell," he rasped, the regulator muffling his voice. Marcus Bell, the figure's helmet turned, and a chillingly familiar face stared back at him. Years had passed, etching lines of cruelty and desperation onto his features, but it was undeniably Marcus Bell. A man believed to be dead, a man who'd been a close associate of his wife's family, a man Lena had warned him about. "Long time no see, Cody," Bell said, his voice distorted by the underwater communicator. "Should have stayed away from this wreck." Cody felt a surge of disbelief and fury. Bell, presumed lost at sea decades ago, was the one who'd been sabotaging him, the one who'd tried to silence him. But why? What was he protecting? Bell disarmed Cody of the salvage bag, securing it with a practiced ease. Then he began to methodically open the safe, ignoring Cody's desperate attempts to stop him. The hydraulic spreader lay discarded on the seabed like a broken toy. Inside, it wasn't gold or jewels or stacks of cash, it was files. Hundreds of meticulously documented files contained within waterproof folders. Photographs, letters, financial records. A meticulously assembled archive of damning evidence. Bell began to scan the contents, his expression growing darker with each passing second. Cody, struggling to regain his breath, managed to get closer, peering over Bell's shoulder. The files detailed a vast conspiracy, stretching back decades, a network of corruption involving powerful politicians, wealthy businessmen, and organized crime figures. Vinny, the Vane Meridi, hadn't just been a bootlegger. He'd been a key player in a larger operation, a shadow government controlling a lucrative network of illegal activities. And then, Cody saw it, photographs of Lena. Lena meeting with Meridi, Lena exchanging envelopes of cash. Lena involved, he felt a wave of nausea wash over him. The woman he'd loved, the woman he'd mourned, was somehow connected to the shadowy world. The truth was a brutal, gut-wrenching blow. She was in too deep, Bell said, his voice cold and devoid of emotion. Your wife, she knew too much. She tried to get out, but they wouldn't let her. Cody lunged at Bell, fueled by a blinding rage, but Bell was ready. He expertly sidestepped the attack and delivered a crushing blow to Cody's chest. The impact sent Cody spiraling backward, slamming into the ship's hull. Pain exploded in his ribs. His vision blurred. She stumbled onto something she shouldn't have, Bell continued, his voice relentless. She threatened to expose them. They made an example of her. You killed her, Cody choked out, his voice laced with pain and fury. I merely facilitated things, Bell corrected. The accident was arranged. A faulty regulator, wasn't it? A tragic mishap. Cody's mind reeled. The so-called accident, the faulty regulator, he'd always suspected something more. Now he knew the truth. Lena hadn't died in a diving accident. She'd been murdered. This ends here, Bell, Cody managed to say, his voice a rasp. It ends with this information remaining buried, Bell retorted, securing the files into a waterproof container. Some secrets are too dangerous to be exposed. Your wife understood that. Suddenly, the ship lurched violently, thrown off balance by the full force of the hurricane. The currents intensified, ripping through the wreckage like a raging river. Visibility dropped to zero, the water becoming a swirling vortex of silt and debris. The Fimorvican groaned and creaked, its aging hull unable to withstand the relentless onslaught of the storm. Cody felt the ship beginning to break apart, the structure collapsing around him. He tried to swim towards the surface, but the currents were too strong. He was trapped, disoriented, his lungs burning. He felt a sharp pain in his side, a searing agony that threatened to overwhelm him. He'd been injured in the struggle, his dive suit compromised. He spotted Bell, disappearing into the swirling darkness. The salvage bag clutched tightly in his grasp. He tried to pursue him, but his body refused to respond. He was losing consciousness. He saw a final object, dislodged from the safe during the struggle, floating near his hand. A small sealed envelope, addressed in Lena's handwriting. A letter he'd never received. He reached for it, desperately trying to grasp it before it drifted away into the abyss. But his fingers were numb, his strength failing. The letter slipped from his grasp, disappearing into the murky depths. The Finmorvican Tuine began to sink rapidly, pulling Cody down with it. The pressure increased, squeezing the air from his lungs. The world around him dissolved into a swirling blackness. He was trapped, injured, abandoned. And the truth, the key to unlocking the mystery of his wife's death, was lost somewhere in the wreckage, slipping away with the storm. The blackness threatened to consume him. Cody's lungs screamed for air, his body a symphony of pain. He'd lost track of time, of depth, of everything except the desperate need to breathe. Instinct, honed by years of diving, took over. He activated the emergency ascent mechanism on his buoyancy compensator, praying it hadn't been damaged in the struggle. A jarring surge propelled him upwards. the pressure easing with each agonizing foot. He fought to stay conscious, battling the black spots dancing before his eyes. He broke the surface, gasping for air, the storm raging around him like a vengeful god. Rain lashed at his face, stinging like needles. Waves crashed over his head, threatening to drag him under again. He spotted the 40 Sizzy dog miraculously still afloat, battling the relentless onslaught. Marco was frantically scanning the water, his face etched with relief. "Cody, you're alive," Marco yelled, his voice barely audible above the wind. He maneuvered a small inflatable towards him, hauling Cody aboard with a strength born of desperation. "Bell," Cody rasped, his voice barely a whisper. "He got away." "The files," Marco wrapped him in a thermal blanket, his brow furrowed with concern. "Forget about the files, Cody. Just hold on. We need to get you to a hospital." But Cody wasn't going anywhere until he confronted Bell. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that the man wouldn't stay hidden for long. He found him an hour later on a desolate stretch of beach, attempting to radio for a rendezvous. Bell was soaked to the bone, his face a mask of defeat, the waterproof container with the files clutched tightly in his hands. "It is over, Bell," Cody said, his voice rasping but firm. He moved with a surprising agility, ignoring the searing pain in his ribs. Marco stayed with the inflatable, ready to call for backup. Bell turned, his eyes filled with a desperate cunning. "This doesn't have to end this way, Cody. We can still walk away from this." "Walk away," Cody spat. "You murdered my wife." "She was a complication," Bell said coldly. "A loose end." "She knew too much." "You're a monster," Cody said, advancing towards him. Bell lunged, attempting to disarm him. But Cody anticipated the move, sidestepping the attack and delivering a powerful kick to Bell's chest. The man stumbled backward, falling to the sand. The fight was brutal, a desperate struggle for survival on the storm-ravaged beach. Cody, fueled by grief and rage, fought with a ferocity he didn't know he possessed. He used his training, his knowledge of hand-to-hand combat, to overwhelm Bell. He disarmed Bell, pinning him to the ground, his knee pressed against the man's throat. "Tell me everything," Cody demanded, his voice laced with venom. "Every name, every detail, everything." Bell, gasping for air, began to confess. He revealed the intricate network of corruption, the names of the politicians and businessmen involved, the decades-long conspiracy that had protected the elite from justice. He spoke of payoffs, blackmail, and intimidation. "It started with the bootlegging operation," Bell said, his voice trembling. "Moretti used the profits to buy influence, to control the local authorities. It grew from there. They were untouchable until your wife started asking questions." Just as Bell finished his confession, the wail of sirens pierced through the storm. The Coast Guard had arrived, alerted by Marco. They swarmed the beach, securing Bell and taking him into custody. The storm began to subside as dawn broke, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and gray. The devastation was widespread. Trees were uprooted, buildings were damaged, and the coastline was littered with debris. But for Cody, the storm within had finally begun to calm. Later, at the Coast Guard station, a detective handed him a small, waterlogged envelope. "We found this hidden inside Bell's gear," he said. It was sealed tight. Cody recognized the handwriting instantly. Lena's. He carefully opened the envelope, his hands trembling. Inside was a letter, penned in Lena's elegant script. "Finn, my dearest Cody, if you're reading this, it means something has happened to me. I've uncovered something dangerous, something that reaches the highest levels of power. Moretti wasn't just a bootlegger, Cody. He was a puppet master, pulling the strings of this entire town. I've been investigating him for months, gathering evidence of his corruption. I found proof of bribery, extortion, even murder. I know this is putting me at risk, but I can't stand by and watch these people destroy our community. I'm sending all the evidence to a trusted colleague, someone who can expose them. Be careful, Cody. Don't trust anyone. And please, forgive me for keeping this from you. With all my love, Lena." Cody reread the letter, his heart aching with a renewed sense of loss and betrayal. Lena hadn't been a victim of circumstance. She'd been a brave, investigative journalist, willing to risk her life to expose the truth, and she'd been silenced for it. The conspiracy had been broken. The names were out. The corrupt officials would face justice, but as Cody stared out at the calm, gray sea, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Lena's letter mentioned a trusted colleague, someone who still possessed a copy of the evidence. Someone who might be in danger, and a nagging doubt crept into his mind. If Bell had been working to protect the conspiracy for decades, who else was involved? Who else was still out there, waiting in the shadows? He'd finally found the truth about his wife's death, but the revelation had opened a Pandora's box of questions. He'd avenged Lena, but at what cost? He was left with a haunting emptiness, a sense of unease that clung to him like the salt spray on his skin. He was finally at peace, but he knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that the storm was far from over. Some secrets, he realized, were better left buried. But once unearthed, they had a way of haunting those who dared to seek them. And he, Cody Rourke, was now forever haunted by the ghost of his wife and the conspiracy that had claimed her life.